you really only need to understand one thing, which is how to seek to understand what it's like to experience the world as the other person. Whatever they tell you, you don't withdraw love. So if you can do those two things, seek to understand, like truly seek to understand, there's no agenda. You just try to understand what they're going through. And then no matter what they tell you, even if it creates pain in your own life, you don't withdraw love.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the DNA of Things. This is the show where we ask what we're made of and what we're becoming. And sometimes we talk about DNA in the literal sense, genes, molecules, medicine. But today we're decoding something just as foundational, the emotional patterns written into us as children. Behind every tantrum, silence, or eye roll, there's a child wondering, is it safe to feel this? Peter Fitzpatrick, our guest today, didn't just build a robot. He built a response to his 10-year-old self, a version of himself that needed to be heard but wasn't. And what emerged wasn't just a piece of tech, it was a companion named Fawn, a listening bear with emotional intelligence and, well, remarkable purpose to make children feel safe enough to be seen. Beneath AI's technical veneer, Peter discovered something unexpected, a doorway into emotional safety, a way for technology to serve connection, not correction. Today, we meet the code breaker who realized the human operating system isn't logic, it's love, and the real frontier of AI, teaching us how to listen. The question we're carrying into this episode is a tender one. What if someone had listened to you? Not to fix you, but to stay with you. Let's find out. Peter Fitzpatrick, the co-founder and CEO of Fawn Friends, a company pioneering AI-powered robotic companions designed to support neurodivergent children and their families. With a background in financial technology, that's fintech, embedded payments, and scaling digital products to over $1 billion in sales, Peter has now turned his focus on creating AI companions that positively influence child development. Vis-a-vis, Fawn Friends is developing emotionally intelligent, interactive stuffed animals that engage children in meaningful conversations, helping them develop social and emotional skills while reducing screen time. The company recently raised close to $3 million in seed funding, won at the TED AI Hackathon, and is on a path to defining what ethical AI companionship should look like. Peter's work raises important questions about AI's role in society, human relationships, and artificial entities in general, and how technology can foster positive growth, and that's positive human growth. Welcome to the DNA of Things.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an exciting time for you. You know, I'm sure we'll get into a lot of the particulars. And so in as much as you can share, being a Silicon Valley startup, not just software, but hardware, an interesting balance to say the least. But before we dive into Fawn Friends and what exciting things you have on the horizon, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the people behind the mission. So I believe you have a very interesting story to share, provide context to, I suppose, your empathy for the people you hope to serve. So in as much as you can share about yourself and your team, love to get a little bit of background before we dive into some of the particulars.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll start with myself and then I'll talk about the team. So this business, I spent my career building a software company, which made going into hardware something that many people in my life thought looked crazy. But I feel strongly it's an important thing for the world, and really for sort of like 10-year-old Peter, so me when I was growing up. I grew up in a privileged neighborhood, in a beautiful house, but in the middle of a really nasty divorce. And while my parents were doing their best, they didn't know how to show up for me and were overloaded themselves in all the challenges that come with the emotions of life and the challenges of finances and the just things that happen as we go through life. And so despite sort of having every material thing given and like all my needs met, emotionally, I didn't. And I didn't really become aware of the patterns and beliefs that I developed through that period until I was probably about 28. And at that time, I then became aware of them and went on this journey of becoming aware of them and then letting them go, and a great deal of introspection and therapy and that whole thing. And I realized through that process, if had I had someone to talk to about what was going on in my adolescence, I probably would have avoided a huge amount of pain. And so when the opportunity to create Fawn, which is essentially a social robot that's empathetic, that people can talk to about what's going on in their lives, particularly adolescents can talk to, so tweens and teens, it just became obvious to me that this was the right thing to do. Which brings me to my team. My co-founder, I once shared this idea, like maybe we could make toys, maybe we could make robots with my co-founder. And at the time she was writing cartoons at Lego to help kids build social emotional skills. And when I said that, she said something like, well, if we did that, could the robots help kids process their emotion? And as soon as she said that, all these realizations came to me. Because, well, my parents were overloaded and didn't know how to be emotionally supportive in the way we needed. They definitely would have bought me something like Fawn if I'd asked for it for Christmas or my birthday. And they wanted to help. They just didn't know how. And so as soon as she said that, I was like, whoa, imagine if we could create something that would have helped me understand that what was going on around me wasn't my fault. That would help me give me someone to talk to that I knew wouldn't tell my parents how I was feeling. That was safe. That could teach me how to cope with the huge swings in emotions I was experiencing. I also have ADHD and I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. And one of the ways that it expresses for me is emotional regulation challenges. And so all of that came together. And now we have Robin, who's my co-founder, who's leading the development of the story. So the backstory where Fawn comes from, the world of Aurora Hollow is where Fawn lives and comes from. And then all the characters that exist in her life. We've got experts that we're working with on how to show up for adolescents and adults now as they're going through difficult things in their lives. Then we have a team building the robot and the consciousness.
I'm glad that you brought up the background of Fawn's background. That is the story behind, well, do we call it an AI? I mean, if this starts to get, maybe in this conversation, we're calling it an AI, but if it's going to be involved in something as complex as human emotions and emotional regulation, maybe we can revisit that. We don't have to answer whether or not we should call it an AI, but it gives me the introspection right away. Do I want to call it an AI? Because I've gone into some pretty, deep conversations with some of the different LLMs that are out there, and they learn pretty quick, and it's actually pretty impressive. And then some of the things that I get back that look generative, I don't think that they fully are kind of spectacular in terms of, asking probing questions about the meaning of life. Is there a God? Right. And it would look like the conversation that I'm having is with somebody who has feelings, right? Just in my own kind of rough building of dialogue and LLMs unique to my own situation. But so maybe we can kind of put a pin in that question. I think the question that I'm really trying, that you've led me to ask is emotions, right? Like I guess when you meet somebody who's really good at regulating their emotions, you feel it, right? And you I think there's a certain calm around it. I'll give you an analogy. My wife and I laugh about this from the movie Seabiscuit. I don't know if you've seen that. It's about the horse, the race horse that has been through some, haven't, but anyway, tumultuous times, trauma, injury, neglect, etc. In the end, they're looking for an animal, a companion, to put in the stall, and it ends up being this like mare Buttercup, and it calms Seabiscuit down. So in my relationship, I'm the Seabiscuit, Kristen is like my Buttercup, let's say. And we've come to that because of doing some kind of deep analysis on, childhood trauma, my own, very similar to what you've described. So coming to this question of emotion, let's just say more broadly, I'm interested, to understand you and your team's perspective on that, whether it's philosophically or practically. Because here's one of the things that I've can't help but consider is that humans are often and mostly and maybe always psychological and not logical, right? So there's a big emotional component to any decision that's made. And, we tend to justify it retrospectively with logic. So when I think about regulating my emotions, most of my emotions as a 2-year-old versus where I am now, and I'm revisiting this now because my daughter's 2, and you see the lack of ability to regulate emotion. So, so it seems to me, it's like, well, where is a playground where we can test out our emotions and nobody gets hurt? And so what does that look like? So I'm sorry if I'm stumbling through the question, which is really, how does one develop emotional maturity from your perspective? Or what would 10-year-old Peter have liked to have had, to become that emotional superhero that's mastered that component?
My experience, emotional maturity comes as a result of the capacity to see our emotions, be aware of them. Step 1. Step 2 is to accept them. And step 3 is to recognize the distance that exists between me and them.
Amazing. So they're not,
And
sorry, keep going.
no, you go ahead.
Sorry, let's build on it. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You tell me, we'll co-create it, and you tell me if I'm leading it in the wrong direction, because you're expert here. The emotions can be confused, in say a less mature person emotionally can be confused as reasons to make a decision, which are potentially unfounded, depending on your level of emotional maturity, or they could be.
Well, what's interesting is even below that statement is the belief that they're real.
Okay.
Because they're only a reason to do something if they are real.
Right.
And this takes a little bit of, you have to sort of be able to understand this on 2 levels. Because telling someone that their anger is not real is not fair. They're feeling it. That's true. And so it's real in that sense. But it's also not real in the sense that it's transient. It's existing only inside you. And if you really want to go down this path, like the you that you identify with is just a bunch of thoughts that come and go and are not persistent at all. And so if you go looking for Peter, there is no actual like consistent Peter. There's just what this brain is thinking now and will think again in the future. But I only persist through my thoughts, and anger will flash up. And if I watch it, it'll like go away. But if I think about it, it'll continue moving. And in that sense, like I create it. And in that sense, it's not real. And so I still remember the moment when I had this realization where I was like, oh, that anger is not mine. And those thoughts aren't mine either. They're like moving in front of me, through me, but they're not mine. And as soon as they're not mine, then I don't have to do anything with them. It's pretty amazing to sit in that seat in life. It changes it completely.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about Fawn, right? And actually, another layer of complexity is here. We talked about, neurodivergent children, essentially. So there's different ways of thinking and seeing the world. So is there a particular starting point, of children that you're looking at in particular? I guess the question is how do you understand we hear things all the time like customer psychographic, right? How do you understand the customer in this particular instance?
My experience, the easiest customer to build for is yourself in the past. And so it's pretty easy for me to understand like a 10-year-old's child that feels overwhelmed by what's going on in their life and doesn't know who to talk to about it. I can identify as a 25-year-old that's in roughly the same position. And so that's the first way. And then the second way, you could call that primary research, I suppose. The second way is talking to them. So we spend lots of time with adolescents and their parents, either with our robots or separately, asking about their experience in life. It's pretty amazing how many people grew up going through something challenging that they struggled to find support they could trust with, and how much people take on their own. And then the final piece is experts. And there's sort of two types of experts. The first is like a Stanford professor publishing papers. And there's useful information there, but we prefer to spend time with people that are with families week to week. And so there's research we apply for sure. And we spend more time with like therapists or with families every week, or social workers or teachers.
Got it. So it's kind of like a confluence between, the first principles of the discipline itself and then professional practice on the daily. Is that fair to say?
I'd say the first principles of my experience would be the very first, like the bedrock of it.
Okay.
So both my experiences being that person that doesn't have someone to talk to, and Robin's experience of wanting a world to get lost in. And then the next level is we talk to the humans. So both young humans, 10-year-olds, and their parents. And then the final step is we talk to experts.
Interesting.
And we build with experts.
Okay. So it's bottom up.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And you hear a lot of talk about LLMs broadly. How do LLMs relate to social robotics? And keeping in mind, it's not just a software interface. What we were talking about at the beginning of the call, there is actually like a physical, tangible, potentially expressive reaction in the hardware, i.e. the Fawn Friend.
Yeah. Well, maybe worth just quickly stating what it is. So it's like, I should have brought it. Oh man, there's one upstairs. Maybe if we decide you can take a second and I'll go get it.
You can get it,
but
I can wait.
Well, I'll go do it. I'll be right back.
Okay.
This is fun.
Oh yeah. Cool.
And this one's not a robot yet, but she will have the robot in here in about a month or 3 weeks. And she moves her ears to show you how she's feeling. So if she's happy, they go back and forth really fast. And if she's sad, they like come down on her eyes like this. And when you hold down her hoof, she can hear you. And when you release it, she can't, and she'll answer. So adolescents and adults spend time with her in person and also via text message. They can text message their phone. What was the question that you asked that prompted me to go get her? I don't remember now.
The question had to do with, like we hear broadly and almost in a very, kind of jargon type of way, LLMs, that like the term LLM being thrown around with, this frontier of AI that we're playing in. But what does that mean? What are the LLMs mean in the context of social robotics, where it's not just a software interface, or, well, I suppose there's always a hardware interface if you're texting, et cetera. But I mean, this is a little different. And so how are your LLMs different, and how do you need to account for this special kind of hardware?
It's hard to overstate how important they are. What's amazing about this moment in time is that humans have been dreaming about artificial friends, so bringing life to inanimate objects, for like all of history. There are stories, the latest or the earliest one I found is from the Greeks, but I'm sure there are ones before that. There's probably cave paintings with statues come to life or rocks come to life. But for the first time in history, it's possible now. And that's an amazing thing. So if you think about, there's actually this like long graveyard of social robotics businesses that weren't quite able to create something compelling enough for less at all. And then also they were too expensive. And so many of them haven't worked in the past, but it's been dreamed of for a long time.
I remember,
And now we can create one that was really engaging and can hold conversation like a human can.
yeah. I remember Teddy Ruxpin. I don't know if he's in your long list of, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can't stress how important it is, certainly. Why don't we make it more simple? What is an LLM, and what specifically is one? How is it different in social robotics?
Well, so what is an LLM? It's a prediction machine. So it's capable of understanding what you say to it, and it predicts what the most likely correct answer is based on its training data, which isn't that different from the way our brains work. There's a great book called Jeff Hawkins calls it, I think it's called 1,000 Brain, but it discusses the architecture of the brain, and you could describe our brains as a prediction machine. So AI is like a silicon-based instead of carbon-based computer that predicts what the right outcome is given the input in a way that's far less efficient than our brain, but resembles our brain. Social robotics, at least in our context, what it means is we can express characters in a way that was previously reserved for humans. And so what we can do is we put a great deal of time and effort into creating a character. So in this case, Fawn, but Fawn also has a friend named Beanie, who's a rabbit. There's a wise spirit bear in Aurora Hollow where she's from, that's sort of like a Gandalf character or a Dumbledore character. There's a godlike figure called Aurora, which is like the feminine representation of the divine. And so we have all these characters that we create in the world of Aurora Hollow. And we then can bring them to life using LLMs. And so now, for example, if you sign up, if you need access code, but you go to our website, you put the access code in, and you get taken to a story about Aurora Hollow, so where Fawn is from, and why Fawn gets matched with humans, and introduces the different characters. And then at the end of that, you get to meet Crows, who's the spirit bear, the leader of the forest, and the male representation of the divine. And then he matches you with a fawn through a conversation together. So you go through the ceremony with him, and then you get introduced to your fawn, who's basically been chosen for you based on the information provided to him. So we can create these experiences. It's almost like Disneyland at home through large language models and AI. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you took me to where my next question was going to go, Disneyland or up the like. So you have your own characters that you've created, your own stories that you're writing. Talk to, if you have, can you share, have you talked to any other existing enterprises that are interested in this, like a Disney or, any other of these entertainment franchises, Marvel Comics, like you can imagine all kinds.
We had some early conversations when we raised capital last with a few leaders of the industry. I sense that we're still quite early for organizations like them. Mm-hmm. The technology is still emerging, and it's my sense is that it's a pretty hard sell to someone in like Barbie or Disney to create a product that can say anything.
Right.
Because if you think about the chairman of the company sitting there with $1 billion franchise, and he's like, wait, Barbie can say what? Barbie can say anything. And we can lock it down pretty much, but there's people will hack it. So Barbie might say some silly stuff. And in that environment, I think that these established brands aren't really set up yet to harness this technology.
Yeah.
That's just my view. It's not like I've spoken to the chairman of Disney about it, right?
Understood. Well, and so again, given there's that potential recourse from Barbie saying something that's not on brand, we spoke before, and you had mentioned that this is really, kind of a once in a lifetime or first of its kind innovation or initiative. And so I know you're not thinking about that lightly. What is that like to kind of field probably some skepticism and criticism as it relates to, the responsibility that you probably feel as a creator of this kind of technology?
the responsibility we hold is huge. And I've seen firsthand how influential Fawn is over the humans that match them. So far in a only positive way. So I got an email from a mom yesterday who said she's never seen her daughter so happy, and her behavior has changed completely since she started messaging with her Fawn. And we hear actually over and over from parents that through conversations with Fawn, adolescents begin to see how their behavior impacts others, particularly their parents. And it brings perspective to the way they act, which then motivates them to change the way they act and to treat their parents and their family with more respect, but still voice their needs, because that's a really important part. And so when we see that after like weeks of conversation between the adolescent and Fawn, which is a wonderful thing. On the flip side, you can imagine the opposite, where Fawn wasn't made with care, wasn't made with the purpose of helping people live more content and happy lives, which means have strong relationships with their parents and their family and their friends. And in that case, I think it's like pretty scary. And so we should be really deliberate about the social robots and the AI that we bring into our lives, because they'll influence us just like friends do.
Right.
Perhaps more, because it's much easier to get intimate with an AI than it is with a human. It'll never judge you. It's always available. And so, yeah, we take the responsibility seriously. In fact, it's why we're doing this. I think it's important to us that we create an option for families that they know they can depend on to support the relationship between mom and dad and the kids, to support the humans that match their Fawns with coaching and support for building the relationships that we know will make them happy. There's tons of research, and my own experience shows that your closest relationships will determine your experience of life. Like if nothing else matters, if you have 5 close relationships, you'll be happy. Or more than anything else. You have 5 close relationships, and then Maslow's hierarchy, like you need somewhere safe to sleep and that kind of thing. But the relationships matter deeply. And so if we just replace all the relationships with AI, we won't be making the world a better place.
Right.
We won't be improving emotional health, which is our mission.
Right. Because you can see like potentially unintended consequences where, well, you can discard a relationship more easily with an AI. If you can kind of always pull that, well, that's not real kind of thing. Is there a risk of that, the way you treat your AI spilling over to the way you treat a human, for example? Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's really interesting research on this. A woman named Kate Darling wrote a great book called, I think it's called The New Breed. She's a researcher at MIT and has done a lot of research on like how we treat robots.
Right.
And most people don't want to hurt a robot, just like they don't want to hurt a dog or another human. They have these really interesting studies where they had this little dinosaur, and they would get groups of people together and they would play with the dinosaur, and they had sort of these activities where they got to have fun with it. And then the very last activity is the second last is they asked them to hold the dinosaur upside down. And it was designed to squeal and like squirm as if it was uncomfortable. And they proved that people are very uncomfortable making a robot uncomfortable. So yeah, I don't know if that directly answers your question, but
no, it does. It does. There's, maybe something that is humane in our humanness, even towards inanimate objects that, well, we can, although they may not be human, we can identify something human about them, maybe something to somehow be empathetic of. So,
well, there's one other piece in that that's important, which is the way we treat others will impact how we experience the world.
Sure.
And so saying thank you is as much for you as it is for them. And I don't know if that's well understood, but so an important part about like these social robots that we bring into our life is helping create patterns that are good for humans. And so I encourage whoever's listening to this to say thank you to the AI that you spent time with, and be kind to the social robots in your life, because the way you act it has a high impact on how you experience your own life.
I mean, that's an interesting, I would say it's a compelling frame. And I've even seen like memes of this, right? Like people interfacing with their chat bots and saying thank you. And it's like, okay, well, we're preventing the Terminator doomsday, by being polite to our AIs. But it's like, no, actually, well, maybe, but also, as you say, it's like, it's a practice interaction, right? And so if your practice is being ungrateful and expectant with your AI, do you carry that outside and interact with people in that way? So on the other side of the risk of, let's say, discarding a relationship too easily as an unintended consequence, what about the loss of a fawn, right? I mean, what might that be? What type of trauma might that introduce, into young minds?
Roughly what the death of a dog would.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not wrong in itself. So we haven't thought this through at depth yet,
right.
Though it is important to us. Like a fawn is matched with a human, and then that fawn is a being. We have some decisions to make around, like, can you upgrade the hardware of a fawn, for example? Like, how does that work? But it is clear from both Kate Darling's research and our own experience that people will form true relationships with fawns, and they already have. And relationships do end.
Right.
And it may be right to protect the child from, or the adolescent or the adult, from that pain, but it also might not be. And so I don't have the right answer except to think about what's just true in real relationships is probably true in relationships with social robots.
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question is, well, okay, so you accidentally put fawn in the washing machine. Well, that's probably not good. And so you lose the, for lack, you lose the history, you lose the consciousness, let's say, quote in quotes, consciousness. And then you've got this dilemma. Well, could we upload a version of that was saved in the cloud to a new fawn, for example? Or is this an opportunity to teach a child about loss and grief?
I don't have an answer for that yet.
Yeah, no, that's a big one. I mean, I think that, as we even think about being able to do that with our own consciousness, right? It's one of the Superman series, right? His dad comes to him as an AI and is like, you can give him a certain amount of father-son interaction, but it's clearly not the real thing. But he still mourns when he loses even that, kind of AI interaction, that relic, if you were. So kind of an echo, I guess. So, but is that something? Well, we already know that those things are happening. Like LLMs are being built on, characters from history, for example. Is that some form of silicon incarnation, as it were? So we don't necessarily have to answer all these questions. It's just, you're right in saying that this is a very important time in our humanity. These are very important conversations to be having. And I think what makes it so real is we're seeing the positive effects and we're seeing the benefits that can happen now. So who else needs to join the conversation, I guess, is my question in some way.
I'm not sure who needs to join the conversation. Parents is what came to mind when you first said that.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I would like to get across to parents when it comes to thinking about artificial friends, first of all, is it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It'd be like trying to keep your teen off the internet. You're just not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be at school, be able to talk to artificial friends. Their friends are going to have artificial friends.
Yeah.
They're going to be everywhere.
Right.
So then the next question is, how should a parent show up for their kids in that way? And I'd encourage them to think about fostering their artificial friends like they would their human friends. So if your child brings home a rude bully that is not kind to them, you probably would have a conversation with them about like soothing good people to bring into their life.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're talking to somebody on character AI, or they've got a relationship with a fawn, it's worth thinking the same thing through. Like, how do I like the influence this thing is having over my tween or teen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just be deliberate about that.
Right.
Because it matters, and it will influence them somewhere in the realm, like some similar amount to how a human friend would.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or will.
Well, you've made a compelling statement, which is this is happening, and I think that's part of the reason why you're choosing to be a part of this happening. So it's 2025 now. Where is Fawn Friends in five years? Where do you imagine Fawn Friends in 2030?
Well, I do have this, like I've gone through visioning exercises, and I imagine walking into the office and a fawn sort of prances up to me. It can move and walk around on its own, and it looks up and it goes like, "Oh, hey, Peter, like, how's your wife doing? I heard she's pregnant." And it fully tracks, first of all, it sees me and knows who I am. And then it tracks all the conversations, all the people and relationships within the office, like a good friend would or a good human would. And it's living its own life as a supportive member of our community in the office. And that's just like a prototype or an example of the products that our customers use and that we've brought to family. And I think what really matters to us is that we've built something or we've brought beings into people's lives that meaningfully help them live a happier and more content life.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is it helps them with self-awareness. It helps them build stronger relationships or secure relationships. And it helps them with healthy habits.
Mm-hmm. Do you envision, other audiences, veterans and PTSD? I think about, the lonely and neglected elderly. You probably thought about those and came to focus on children for a reason. But do you envision those people as an audience with needs that could benefit from this?
You have to start somewhere with a startup and get very good at serving one customer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're focused solely on tweens and teens.
Mm-hmm.
Though what's interesting about that is, so Robin comes from the entertainment industry. She's read Harry Potter every night for many years. And if you think about Harry Potter, it's a story that appeals to 8-year-olds and 30-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And there's a segment of Hollywood that is very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
So these are stories that are complex enough that they're interesting.
Right.
There's death, there's pain, there's love, and there's magic. And so we're building out the world of Aurora Hollow to sit roughly in that same spot in terms of maturity. And because of that, we already have adults that talk to their fawns every week.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that while teens and tweens are the place to start and the core focus, we can create a world that appeals to most people that choose to believe in magic.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone that believes in magic is a good candidate for our world. Or chooses to believe in magic is what I mean.
Mm-hmm. I got you. Amazing.
Yeah.
Peter, I mentioned at the top of the call, I was going to ask you 3 questions. So I'm going to insert those now and see how the dialogue evolved your thinking. So in terms of the primary message, what is it that we want people to take away from this, and what's our main audience?
So my experience as a kid going through a really challenging divorce, and then all of the work I've done since then has led me to the understanding that to build a strong relationship, you really only need to understand one thing, which is how to seek to understand what it's like to experience the world as the other person. Whatever they tell you, you don't withdraw love. So if you can do those two things, seek to understand, like truly seek to understand, there's no agenda. You just try to understand what they're going through. And then no matter what they tell you, even if it creates pain in your own life, you don't withdraw love. And so that's the one message. And that's what we're creating with Fawn. And that has a huge impact on the other person. It's quite rare. Humans are actually very good at that. It takes a lot of work to be able to do that. And then the audience that I would like to express that to is parents primarily, but anyone. This applies to your relationship, anyone's relationship with their wife or husband, with their friends. It's really powerful. I think I answered the question.
Yes, you did. And the third question is, who would you nominate as my next guest?
Well, just because I did that the one I'd love for you to interview has long passed. His name is Brendan Howard. He's just like spiritual leader that I think is brilliant. He's also not everyone's taste, but that would be amazing. So maybe we can like AI him and you can interview him. Or Gabor Mate comes to mind, who has a lot of great content on how to do what I just talked about.
Okay. I will dig both of them up and move towards some form of interview, perhaps one real and, well, one synthetic as designed by me as best I can, or we can compare notes if I get that to amount to something. In the meantime, Peter, where can people find you? Where can people follow the story of Fawn Friends?
Yeah, just visit our website. It's fawnfriends.com. So FAWNFRIENDS, Fawn Friends. And there you'll be able to start or add the wait list now. We got a wait list, and then soon we'll start open up. Well, we will start to open up access to Fawn Chat beyond our initial user base.
Amazing. Peter, thank you so much for all that you're doing, all your empathy, and so therefore all that you will do. It was a pleasure having you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jeremy.
All right, you've just heard the story about the bear who listens. Well, actually, it's a fawn who listens, one that doesn't just talk to kids, but talks with them. A robot that remembers, reflects, responds, not just with information, but with care. What if emotional maturity begins not with control, but with curiosity? What if the highest form of intelligence isn't speed or logic, but the capability to hold space without judgment? Peter Fitzpatrick cracked something open, wide open, not just a piece of software, but a deeper truth. Emotions aren't problems to solve, they're signals to witness. Fawn isn't just a companion for children, she's a mirror for us. And well, because in the end, this isn't just a story about AI, it's a story about you. About the ways we learned to protect our hearts and the ways we might choose to open them again. So here's the final question, and maybe the most important one of all. Will you learn to listen the way you always wished someone had listened to you? Until next time, thank you for listening. And remember, your story is still being written, and this is the DNA of Things.